Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode of the podcast, we'll be talking all about the Open Metaverse, learning in public, promoting diversity in Web3, and much more with LDF, Chief GM Officer of the Open Metaverse. GM, LDF.
GM. I've been looking forward to both chatting with you and getting into, these are just my favorite topics, so I could talk for hours and I'm sure we've got lots to discuss. But thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. So for people who don't know you and your background, can you fill people in, tell them a little bit about your background and how you initially learned about Web3 and fell down the Web3 rabbit hole?
It's so funny. I think the thing I struggle with the most is like, who are you, right? Like, what do you do? Where do you come from? So I'm always working on my elevator pitch, but I'll start with how I fell down the Web3 rabbit hole and then how that ties into kind of my background. But I actually was a little bit newer to the space. NFTs were kind of the thing that got me really interested in kind of this gateway to the open metaverse, Web3, whatever we want to call the bigger picture bucket. I had heard about crypto for years, but like it just really wasn't contextually interesting to me. And so my background is more so in tech, marketing, gaming, kind of marketing strategy and business development. And so when I started basically realizing that there was a technological solution in blockchain that enabled us to create new monetization models, and really this idea of the ownable web was incredibly interesting to me as someone who was kind of studying the creator economy and kind of like esports and the future of work. And so as a non-technical person, it was super eye-opening for me to be like, oh, we have new tools to play with. I kind of get to use Web3 as an excuse to start from scratch on building what I think experiences look like online from a place of not just iterating on the existing platforms that we're used to using. And so I spent the majority of my career working at Facebook and most recently Reddit, kind of mentioned it, but basically helping gaming, e-commerce, and crypto companies later think about how to connect with audiences online. And that was super, super exciting to me as I really dug into NFTs first and then really like, oh, I see where this is going 10 plus years from now.
That's super interesting because when I first heard about NFTs, it definitely took me a little bit to wrap my head around what NFTs were. Like probably at least a few months of very actively talking to a lot of smart people about NFTs and having so many different people re-explain what NFTs are from with their own words and from their own experience to me before I understood. So when you first heard about NFTs, did it just click with you immediately or was there a process there too?
So it's funny looking back, I don't actually remember like the first time that I was introduced to NFTs as a concept. The thing I remember the most was actually how I first used them. So I minted before I ever bought any NFTs or even really read a lot of pieces about NFTs themselves. I actually minted one of my own designs because you can see I kind of have a thing for merch, and as I was kind of helping other businesses look at marketing strategy. I myself was never a digital marketer. And so one of the perks that we had at Facebook was that you got like ad credits to basically go use the marketing tools to go dog food our own products. And so I used that as an opportunity to spin up like a couple of little Shopify stores where I wasn't telling anyone that I knew. It wasn't like trying to build a business, but it was like, oh, Shopify, drop shipping, creator economy, like Instagram shop. How do I just kind of like play with these tools a little bit? And so when I heard about NFTs, my first thought was like, not, hey, I'm going to go sell this artwork, but oh, I actually can't prove that I drew this thing myself or that I own it. And the idea of being able to prove kind of the provenance of where this design came from, and the idea that if I eventually did build a brand around one of these different products, that original design would be valuable someday was interesting to me. But I actually went on OpenSea, I minted an NFT for the first time, and then I pretty much forgot about it for a couple of months. And then Actually, interestingly enough, Stoner Cats was one of the first projects that, outside of just the traditional like membership model or like NBA Top Shot, which again, I like got it, but I just wasn't super interested in like spending a lot of time to really dig into participating, was the first time that I was like, oh, I understand from an entertainment perspective that people complain all the time about how they have to kind of change their creative visions before it actually gets approved to go to market. And so I thought it was super interesting from like a crowdsourcing perspective for people to both play a role in how creatives like basically create what we have always known was valuable, but that was the first moment that I was like, oh, this is interesting and I actually want to participate. So Stoner Cats was like the first NFT that I actually bought, and then Cool Cats very quickly after that. And from that moment, I created a Twitter, and that's when I started finding other people talking about it. And from that moment on, I was just pretty much hooked.
So is this, shout out Stoner Cat, first of all. I actually really enjoyed the project. It was entertaining, if nothing else. For when you're talking about this like artwork that you minted when you first joined the space, are you talking about the GM one, the smiley face and the frowny face? There's another one?
Actually, yeah. So this is on a completely separate like wallet, totally unrelated to LDF. Like I hadn't even made a Twitter at this point, didn't know about GM at all, and so it was actually a Bitcoin design. It was like the Monopoly man in a hot air balloon that was like Bitcoin branded, which is hilarious looking back at it. But the artwork that you're describing was kind of actually not even the first NFT that I minted myself as I was kind of participating in this space, but one of the first things that really struck me about kind of the language and this kind of shared inside jokey nature of what I kind of described as treating Twitter as kind of a group chat. It was so fun for me to feel like I had a right to participate without having a technical background or having been investing for years and years and years. And Twitter was the first place that I felt like was the lowest barrier to entry for me to be putting thoughts out that didn't have to be fully baked, that didn't have to be like a published article, that didn't have to have like the blessing of my employer or be spoken on a stage or like actually feel like I was a subject matter expert in order to have the right to participate. And so the GM meme that you're describing was actually, funny enough, 6529, now like what feels like 10 years ago, was talking about CC0 and kind of this idea of reimagining what IP rights look like, which I hadn't spent a lot of time really considering the different models for why IP existed the way that it did, except for the fact that I knew it was valuable, right? I knew that companies protected their IP at all costs. I was also super interested in this idea of like user-generated content. And so he tweeted, create your own meme and like post it below, and if I like it, I'll buy it. And I hadn't sold any NFTs. I had minted a couple of old blog posts that I went back and took screenshots of because I was like, I didn't want to financialize myself. I still had a job at the time. I was having fun, like buying things because I liked them. I really wanted the ethos to feel warmer, I guess, than just like, hey, I'm buying this asset with an intent to flip it. That was just really never my mentality. And so I dubbed myself kind of the chief GM officer literally when I started Twitter, partially because I didn't want my work and personal life to feel totally conflated. I was still experimenting on the side. It was fun for me to feel like that people I knew weren't necessarily watching me all the time, but that I got to almost take on a little bit of a different persona. So literally within 10 seconds, I drew this meme that was like mad face, good morning, happy face, GM. And I posted it and literally replied right after, like, I'm so sorry. Like, this is so bad. And he responded and was like, no, it's great. I'll buy it. And so I had just gotten a foundation invite, hadn't minted anything on foundation before, didn't even really know how it worked. But I was so excited. He was like, I'll buy it for 0.1 ETH. I'm like, that's a couple $100 for this little meme that I drew. Couldn't have run to my computer fast enough to put it up. Did this whole research. Like I looked up law, like legal terms for what releasing the rights to my art even looked like. I like dedicated it to 6529 and I posted it not realizing that it was going to go to an auction. Again, I was super excited to sell it for 0.1 ETH. All of a sudden, I posted it, and I think he might have posted something about it, which he totally front ran himself. But like people started bidding on the meme, and I'm sitting here in my closet, like, what is happening? I'm not an artist. I'm not pretending to be an artist. I'm not pretending that this thing is really good. Again, I had been like tweeting for a couple months at that point, but was never planning on like selling anything. And so Richard jumped in, Loomdart jumped in, and I'm like losing my mind because over a 24-hour period, this zero point 0.1 ETH meme that I was so excited to sell for a couple $100s is all of a sudden like passing 1 ETH, passing 2 ETH, passing 5 ETH. And I'm like, I feel guilty at this point, right? Like I feel like I took advantage of 6529, that like this thing is not worth that much money. And so when the auction closed, I messaged him and apologized like profusely. I was like, I am so sorry. I did not mean to do this. And he was so kind and messaged me like, don't worry about it. We're going to change the world. And from that moment on, I just felt this, I mean, not only like connection to him in this space, but like seriously a duty to not make that for nothing. Because still to this day, it's insane. Like that meme ended up being in Times Square among pieces with like ACK and like actual real artists that I super, super, super respect. But yeah, people finding that meme is always a difficult way for them to be introduced to NFTs through me, because I'm like, no, we need to take like 16 steps back. That's not what it's all about. You can't just go mint anything and expect to make a bunch of money. But that sale is what prompted me to not quit my job because I thought I was going to be an artist or anything, but it gave me the financial flexibility to say, look, I feel already a sense of urgency and duty to the space. And yeah, from that moment on, I kind of have just felt our responsibility to make that worth it.
This is my first time hearing this story too. And I saw this a while ago and I've been wondering about it. And for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, we'll try to, if you're watching the YouTube version of this, we'll put it on the screen so you can see what LDF is talking about. But it literally is just an angry face. Like if you were to draw a circle with like eyes and
like with my fingers,
frown.
I drew this on my iPhone.
Yeah. And then the other one is literally a smiley face, like that, like a 4-year-old could draw. And it just says good morning under the angry one and GM under the smiley one. So you can like, you really don't need the like screen share to
I know, I'm not like
this.
putting myself down in any way. Like that's literally what it is.
Yeah, that's literally what it is. And then just to clarify a couple of things. So 6529, for people who don't know, is Punk 6529, who is I guess he has like probably a few 100,000 followers on Twitter and is a bit of an influencer in his own right. And then CC0, which you were talking about earlier, is that like no copyright reserved thing in Creative Commons. So just saying pretty much that like you don't
it's a
have
JPEG.
Yeah. You don't have any
Literally.
copyright over it. Yeah. So, okay, I have so many questions that stem out of that. First of all, I think one thing you do super well that I think is actually a lot harder to do than maybe you would give yourself credit for is this whole learning in public thing. Like the fact that you sort of just took the plunge, like you minted an NFT without knowing what the hell it was. You ran this incredible foundation auction without knowing what the hell that was. You just like started engaging with 6529 on Twitter. And you did all of these things that are really scary for people. And then as you've gone along, we'll get to like the other things that you've done that are part of your whole learning in public thing. But I guess like, how do you get yourself into the right headspace for learning in public and not being scared of that?
Honestly, it's funny you say headspace because I honestly think the more or the less I think or the less I try and plan it out, the easier it is. I think in my professional life have been so used to having everything meticulously planned for months in advance, run by legal, perfectly ready to go to market as a finished product. And that's why like I have honestly just come into this space so grateful for an opportunity to have other people who are interested in talking about all of the nerdy stuff that I geek out over all the time. And so it's definitely been a blessing for me to be able to feel like I don't have to pretend to know everything. That's very much the headspace that I myself operated in this space, right? Like I didn't want to come in and pretend anything. If anything, I really wanted to learn from the people around me. I was genuinely curious about how things worked. Like something like a foundation auction for me was like, oh my gosh, I have a reason to do this thing now, or an excuse to talk to this person who wrote this incredible piece that I read that sparked some thoughts. I think a combination of being home, working all day in a closet by myself, and feeling like that I was doing very repetitive tasks at work, which is where I find I make a lot of friends through work. I really like working through problems with other people. And so for me, Twitter, Web3, all of it was really just an excuse to be a student again, honestly. And so I just like pinch myself every day that it works somehow, because I just am so wildly grateful for the fact that I've just had another opportunity to be able to, yeah, just learn from the people around me. And that just happens to happen in public.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Like 100% being thrown into this Web3 podcasting world when I knew nothing about Web3 and figuring it out as I went along. I'm sure some of those early episodes of the podcast were extremely cringe for people who are listening. But you know, you have to get here. There's a journey to everywhere. Like no one just ends up one day
That's
waking
right.
up like knowing everything.
And that's why it's beauty in the process, right? Like if you don't, and that's why, like, to me, a lot of it has been around language and changing language for myself, at least, where actually my friend Isabella and I started a podcast last summer before I was even really super invested in this space. And I was trying to convince her that she needed to participate. And so it's funny, actually, the first episode of our podcast, I was like, I'm obsessed with consumer crypto and the future of whatever. And she's like, I love TV. And I'm like, no, you don't have to like have a PhD in this stuff to know that you actually do understand it, just maybe from a different lens than the very technical white papers that you have been sent to read, or like, I don't know, just it's so funny looking back that we understand these trends without being able to put a finger on what that means. And so yeah, learning to love the process has been the most important learning for me.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Another thing I found out in the metaverse is this resignation letter from Reddit. So when you resigned from Reddit, you wrote this resignation letter and then you minted that as an NFT. What inspired you to mint this and make this public and forever ingrained on the blockchain?
Well, it's actually funny because I had to remint it because my last day changed because I jumped the gun a little bit. I resigned at Reddit and I felt this sense of finality. I kind of wanted to go into the unknown. I wanted to, if I was going to talk about the future of work, I definitely wanted to live it first instead of like writing articles about how other people should think about it. Like I really felt like I needed to go first. And so when I told my boss at Reddit that I was planning on leaving, I minted it like that day. And then I presented this plan to them that was like, listen, I know the job that you hired me for. I love what you guys are doing, but like, this is how all of the stuff I'm talking about outside of work could affect your business. Like, here's a 10-page paper basically that I'm writing you along with my resignation letter to show basically like how much I care about this, and that it's not like a zero-sum game, but that I really needed to feel like that I was participating at this very crucial moment in time, not in a way that was like rolling a boulder up a hill and trying to convince other people why this was the future, but instead was just like starting to actually test and learn. And so, yeah, I minted the resignation letter, never have any plans to sell it. I think I mentioned it with like the blog post earlier, but I don't only see NFTs as something that you have to financialize. Like a lot of these things are just memories to me and moments in time that I want to feel ownership over, right? Like I could have written that email, but like Google Gmail like deletes emails after 30 days, and like having a screenshot of it on my computer just didn't feel right at that point. But when I sent them that paper, they were like, wait, hold on, like maybe we could come up with another role. And so it ended up being like another month and a half that I stayed. And so I ended up minting it again, like with the date crossed out with the new day. And so that was funny too, because I'm like, oh, this is immortalized forever, but like it wasn't even right in the first place. So
Okay,
now there are two.
I was wondering about the date crossed out because I saw that the date had been crossed out and rewritten in, and I was like,
Yes.
I wonder what happened here. And that explains it.
Yep.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about the Open Metaverse since you are a self-proclaimed chief GM officer of this Open Metaverse. What is the Open Metaverse? Let's start there.
Well, I'm going to say a cop-out answer, and I'm going to say we don't know what the Open Metaverse is, and I do not want to dictate what the Open Metaverse is. I simply want all of us as individual users and people and decision makers to, I know I keep mentioning that this like very formative period is definitely a window that feels like it's closing. Web3 to me is almost a foregone conclusion at that point, but it's almost a meme because I think there's a number of different ways that all of these different technologies can play out. And to me, the meme of the open metaverse more than anything is the idea that in order to actually play a role in creating a different system than what already exists today, people need to understand that with ownership comes responsibility of making those decisions. And in my opinion, we have an opportunity to have more people than have ever been able to contribute, not only from like a join a company and plan out their roadmap perspective, but literally just even being aware of what's happening. I think about like when Facebook and Apple and all of these companies that we look to as these gigantic industry giants today got started. Like we love to joke about Steve Jobs in his garage. Like there was no Twitter space where you could go listen to how decisions were being made in that formative period to be like, you know what, actually, I don't like the direction that Apple is taking this technology. We need to build another product. And same thing with hiring, same thing with people creating companies for the first time, joining organizations. This idea of transparency at this early stage of making decisions that are going to affect our future, I just think is so important. And so whether it is like which chain should win, like there's so much speculation happening, which is great. But I just really care about empowering all of the other people who are not, quote, in our little space right now to feel like they have a right to participate without, again, all these credentials that we're used to needing to have in order to have an opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you see gamification playing a big role in Web3, because I know you have somewhat of a background in gaming. And so like how have you seen that shift from, what gaming represented and how it operated in our traditional world and now the role that it's playing in Web3?
It's super interesting because when I started working in the gaming space, there were a lot of assumptions that were thrown around, both from people within the industry and outside. And it was like, gamers are 18 to 24-year-old boys sitting in their mom's basement and playing games for hours a day. And it's funny, like, even growing up, I wasn't a big gamer myself. My brother was, but my parents definitely didn't see gaming as something that was productive, right? Like esports, I think was the first time that actually it's funny that monetization is always the root of value for a lot of institutions, and just like that's how our society in the US like works right now. But it was funny because I would watch people like my brother spend so many hours a day building soft skills that I actually thought were super valuable, right? Like being able to cooperate with other people and being able to think creatively about strategy and just all of these interpersonal skills that could have different outlets, but because there wasn't a clear path to how this was a career choice, it didn't seem like it was valuable. And so obviously that was like in my early life, but as I grew up, the same kind of trends still existed where it was like, well, there's no women that are gamers, right? Or like, I mean, I think Fortnite was a super good example of starting to prove, even just like with esports tournaments, like, no, we needed a kid to be able to win millions of dollars for parents to then start saying, oh, I'm going to take this seriously and I'm going to treat it as if it's like a sport, right? But then on that same like model, I was basically watching all of these mobile gaming companies make billions and billions of dollars off of passive gamers who are a completely different audience, right? It was like moms who were waiting for their kids while they were picking them up at school, or like, kids like asking their parents for money to buy Fortnite skins that they couldn't do anything with. And so even just this idea of like what a game even is, I was watching those same trends play out on social media, right? Like in a sense, it was just a different kind of game. I was the type of kid that wanted to play Minecraft, but like turn off the monsters and turn off the nighttime mode because I just wanted to build. And so I think I'm really excited to start watching gaming take on almost like a new role, which is just engagement, right? Like I think Robinhood was a really good example of like gamifying investing, right? Where you don't necessarily need to want to do the thing for the thing's sake, but like the act of doing something, doing it with other people, being collaborative, I think is like going to be table stakes within all user experiences in this next kind of phase of the internet. And so I'm just kind of one of those annoying kids who's like, why though? And like, what is gaming? And like, what does that even mean? And so I personally, while I think things like play to earn gaming are like interesting, I'm more excited to start watching some of the things we've always known about education and entertainment and content creation play out in other spheres that don't necessarily look like gaming today, which is just basically making things fun, right? If someone doesn't want to do something online, they're going to go somewhere else to do something they want to do. And so anywhere that drives attention to me it has some aspect of gamification, whether it's intentional or not.
In many ways, it's kind of shocking to me how little gamification has been built into all of these different aspects of work. It's almost like we somehow have this unconscious thought that games are just for kids. And once you grow
Right.
up and you're an adult, then it's time to be serious. It's no longer,
Yep.
you can't have fun anymore. Everything is so serious. And like you're meant to hate your job because that's what a job is. It's just a way to make money so you can keep yourself and your family alive. Like that's all that was. And I'm really surprised by that because it's like, I think anyone who really has studied human psychology at all will tell you that making things fun is a great way to grab people's attention and a great way to get people engaged in doing things. And you would think
Absolutely.
that, in even traditional marketing in any industry, like making things fun and building some sort of game into that would be a great strategy for you to get people to do
Totally.
the thing that you want them to do.
I will say though, that reminds me, like, this is my other fear with like the gamification of everything though, is like, I love this quote. I can't remember where it's from, but it's like, first you build the system and then the system builds you, right? Like, if you look at Twitter as like a gamified social media platform, it is optimized for likes and for retweets and for like not discussion, but like debate. And so I think this is why I care a lot about not having just this very small, focused group of people deciding what those games are, because you're right, it does shape what actions people take because we are built to game systems, right? And so that's why I think it's really important to think about like what we're actually trying to encourage instead of how do I get more engagement and thinking about it in a short-term way.
Yeah, games hold a lot of power, so we definitely need thoughtful people curating and creating these games. That's a really good
Absolutely.
point. Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about that you're sort of like the queen of memes. And a lot of your artwork, like if people were to go on OpenSea and go to your, like the artwork that you've created, they'll see that a lot of it is memes, starting with that GM meme that we talked about earlier. There's a lot more like really good memes there too. And you post memes on Twitter all the time. What role do you see memes playing in Web3, in the open metaverse? Like, why are memes such a big part of the open metaverse?
Well, to me, memes are such an important part of culture. I just don't know that we've taken a lot of time to really be conscious of the memes that kind of control our lives. I talked about kind of this idea of systems building us, and I really, really believe that. And so to me, religion is a meme. The United States flag is a meme. Like, just do it is a meme. Like, and so as I think about basically translating complex topics into something that can be remixed and rethought, to me, GM is the meme that I have kind of built, not a brand around, but like it was the interconnectedness between all of these different ideas that play out in certain NFT communities, or the idea of decentralization. And so having essentially like a template that other people can bring their own experiences to and make their own is, to me, the most effective way of not changing people's minds, but giving them some form of shared understanding that lets them get to the next level of understanding together and in a more curated way, right? Like, I don't necessarily think that everyone's learning journey or path within the open metaverse can or should be the same. But if we can agree on a few things, like, to me, the fact that we respect each other's opinion, and that like we genuinely care about other people, and those are the most important foundations. And to me, that's what a meme is just a shared foundation with which you can build more complex ideas on top of. And so yeah, I think memes have always controlled us, and they will continue to.
I think another cool thing about memes is that it just provides an additional outlet for people to communicate what they're thinking and
Yes,
feeling. If maybe like using words and writing essays isn't their preferred method of communication, this just provides another outlet. And I also think that memes, they allow people from different cultures and different languages to participate, because you could
absolutely.
have one meme template that, like you might create a certain meme out of it, but somebody else creates a completely different meme. Like they see
Totally.
it in a totally different way. And I think that's a really interesting way to start conversations and to give people a way to communicate what they're thinking.
And memes too, like that. I think visual memes that you're describing are probably the most prolific that we're aware of. But like, I think about like TikTok sounds are memes, right? Or like quotes from movies are memes. Like, it's just this shared, like, I have a deeper, like, we understand each other because we have a shared reference point. And then we can use that in a bunch of different contexts, which is so fun. And I think going to be one of the most important parts about NFTs in particular in the future, which is like, no one gets credit for creating a meme template right now, even though it is literally shaping culture, I think, faster than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's something that you've started to do with like your own mint artworks, is minting the templates that you create. And I think more people should take on that idea and do that as well. But when I think about memes, I think, you know, as is true with everything, there's two sides to every coin. So this is sort
Absolutely.
of like the positive side of memes, but there can be a dark side as well. And to me, that's sort of creating a culture that's very homogenous, where everybody thinks the same way. And it just becomes this
Totally.
echo chamber of, a lot of sheep, essentially. And that's something that I think we've also started to see on crypto Twitter more
Yeah.
generally. In your view, like, what do you think are some things we can do to prevent that and to make sure that we're still being inclusive while building this really fun culture that makes it seem like we have this inside joke between us, but not doing it in a way that prevents other people from joining in?
Yeah, it's I think one of the hardest questions that we have to answer as a group, and I think this is why I care a lot about asking these questions while like new platforms are being built, right? Because I think one of the interesting things about memes is this layerability. And so that's why, to me, like, GM as the foundation of a meme that I want to proliferate, like that's what's baked into it, right? Is the fact that I shouldn't have the exact same views as you in order to respect you. And so therefore, where things get super interesting is those overlaps where like I might take a meme template and make it even more niche to something that really resonates with me that will not resonate with everyone else. They might get one part of it, but like the people who really get it, really get it. And so I think those building places for those intersectionalities to like find each other, but then disperse. I think that's another thing, right? Like I look at community building right now as a very almost like recruiting for an organization, like hiring and retention, where I think what's way more interesting is giving people shared experiences and then like encouraging them to go off on their own to create new connections that have different overlaps. And I totally get why the existing platforms don't optimize for that. That is a more complex problem that we didn't even know we needed to solve when first we were basically trying to feed the supply side of content on the internet to encourage people to participate. Now we've almost flipped that script where I can't find, I mean, Reddit, it was so funny. So many people that I talked to when I started working there from outside the company, their only experience with Reddit was like, oh, when I Google something, I specifically add like Reddit to the end of it because I want to see someone else's opinion where I'm like, I want to know how to log into my Apple ID if I lost my phone and I lost my computer and like there's a lot of nuance that can't necessarily be communicated today. And so that's something with this layerability that I think is going to be really interesting in not trying to make people all the same and stay the same, but give them more points of reference with each other that they take back individually on their journey.
Yeah. And I think, it's going to be a slow process to sort of
Oh, yeah.
opening this up to more people and making the space more diverse. But I think it's something that people are thinking about. And you yourself have created a community of women in NFTs, which I think is super awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about that and like how the idea came about and like what it is today and like if any women are listening who are interested in NFTs, like how they can get involved?
Absolutely. So I'll give a lot of credit for this to Isabella, who's like one of my closest friends. We've worked at every company together. We have like a very strong overlapping background, especially in our careers. And I mentioned she and I started a podcast last year. So I was like talking her ear off about all of these things because I was just like, I jumped straight into Twitter and was like having conversations, and she didn't feel quite as comfortable doing those things. And so I remember the moment that the Twitter got created, which was for a period of time, there were like all of these engagement baiting tweets that were like, where are all the women in NFTs? And like, of course, women are like right here, like I'm here and whatever. And so Isabella was like, we should host a space where we talk to women and like find more projects and like help promote them. And I at the time didn't have access to hosting Twitter spaces. And so I actually said to her, I'm like, do you have the ability to host Twitter spaces? And so she was like, oh, I don't know. So she just went to like make this account and saw that it wasn't taken. And so she was like, you know what? Like totally should grab this handle. And she actually felt like a lot more comfortable posting from that account than she did from her own personal. And it's funny because I also have this other community called GM House. And like I see these two as kind of running parallel, solving almost the same problem for different audiences. But it was basically this idea that we kind of touched on it, right? Like the onboarding process for entering this space, it's tough. It's tough if you don't have a group of people that you feel like you can ask stupid questions to, or try things out without feeling like they needed to be finalized. And so through creating even that Twitter, it was just immediately clear that everyone was kind of looking for a safe space to basically have like cohort based education that felt like we were doing it together instead of having to read a bunch of documents and then go produce something ourselves. And diversity in every case is something that I care a lot about. It was something that we were very, very passionate about with gaming. But more than anything, it was really just like giving people the confidence to participate and show up with their diverse experiences, right? Like, I think women have a really important role to play in asking some of these questions, being very intentional about what are you trying to accomplish. I also thought that it extended to just non-technical people in general who the things that they were confused by were very much valid concerns in many different cases. And sometimes it does take an outside perspective to be able to not just take things at face value based on number go up, token value, whatever KPIs we want to set for success of some of these projects. And from there, it really just snowballed like, all right, women are here. They want to talk. Where can we convene? How can we support each other? How can you help find your co-founders and artists and really just like grow with other people? And so it's much like everything else in this space. It feels like started out very, very organically and kind of just grew from there.
I love that. I love that. Well, LDF, I feel like I could talk to you for like hours more, but I know you have to run.
Have to.
So, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
Oh my gosh, that's a whole bag of whatever. I feel like we're going to have to talk more. But no, I just think for everyone listening, whether you're obsessed with Web3 and it's all you think about all day, every day, or if this is like your first time kind of considering some of these topics as something interesting to you, my biggest piece of advice is to just like try. Just ask questions and really get in touch with like your own personal perspective. Ask questions, whether it's publicly or privately, because it's super easy to feel like you're late. But the reality is we have so much work to do in order for us to realize the possibilities of what Web3 can be. And none of it is guaranteed at this moment in time. So that's my biggest thing.
Super inspirational. Thank you for leaving everybody on such an inspirational note. If people want to follow you or get in touch with you personally, how can they find you and how can they learn more about women and NFTs, GM House, and anything? Feel free to plug away. Anything else you want to plug?
I know I need like a link tree right here.
Yeah, right.
Like, Web3 does not fix this. I primarily exist. I think Twitter is my social media of choice. LDF_GM. GM House Official is the Twitter for that. I don't post as much as I should. Women in NFTs is another Twitter account. And then Isabella and I also have a podcast that is called the In Between Podcast, primarily just on Instagram right now. But yeah, I'm sure we're going to have to swap. We're going to have you on and talk even more.
Let's do it. I can't wait. All right. Well, thanks again so much, LDF. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll be back soon with another episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to get involved in helping shape next season of the podcast, including nominating and voting on your favorite guests, go to rehash.mirror.xyz to join our crowdfund. And don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe to help us get this podcast heard by as many people as possible. Thanks for being part of this community, and I can't wait to connect with many of you in Discord and Twitter soon.